Before getting into today's stories, let me know where everyone is from and what time so we can send wishes of health and luck to you and your relatives and friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos of our channel. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's get started. Story 1. It was late on a crisp autumn evening, and I had just finished a long week of work. My sister and I were known for our late-night creative projects. We loved exploring new ideas and would often stay up until the early hours of the morning, bouncing thoughts off each other. This particular night, we were in the middle of some intense brainstorming, and the clock was inching towards 1 a.m., as usual. I was at her house where we often collaborated on our artistic endeavors. "Let's take a break," I suggested, stretching my stiff muscles. "We can grab some snacks or something from the gas station down the street." She agreed, and we made our way outside to her car. The evening air had grown unusually cold, and I noticed her car was running low on gas. "Should I go ahead and fuel up?" I asked. "Yeah, might as well," she replied, giving me a tired smile. I drove to the nearby Circle K, a place that always felt oddly familiar, yet unsettling at night. As I pulled up to a gas pump, I noticed the place was quieter than usual, almost too quiet. It was a weekend, and this part of town usually had some movement at this hour. But tonight the streets were empty. I got out of the car, walking toward the store. I wasn't sure why, but a strange tension in the air made me pause for a moment. The wind had died down, and the only sound I could hear was my footsteps on the pavement. That's when I saw him, a man sitting on the sidewalk in front of the store. He was older, his face shadowed beneath a worn hat, and he didn't acknowledge me when I passed. Something about him felt off. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. Inside the store, everything seemed normal at first. A couple was arguing near the counter, their voices rising in a mixture of frustration and laughter. The cashier looked amused, almost as if this was a routine occurrence. I paid for my things quickly, eager to return to the safety of the car, but as soon as I stepped outside, that strange feeling returned. The world around me felt different, heavier somehow, as though the shadows themselves were watching. My eyes scanned the surroundings involuntarily, and that's when I saw him again. The same man who had been sitting on the sidewalk. He wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing off to the side of the entrance, staring directly at me with eyes that seemed too cold, too calculating. My heart started to race, but I told myself not to panic. I turned and began walking briskly toward the car, trying to keep my composure. He didn't move, but I could feel his gaze piercing through me, like he was studying my every move. A deep sense of unease settled in my stomach, and I glanced over my shoulder. "Don't look at him too long," my sister's voice echoed in my head. I hadn't even realized she was thinking the same thing. She had been unusually quiet the whole time I was inside. I quickened my pace, telling myself it was nothing, just an odd coincidence. As I walked, I noticed him shifting, his figure subtly moving in my peripheral vision. He was following me, quietly but surely. Panic surged through me, but I fought the urge to run. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me scared. Still, I could feel my pulse quickening as his footsteps matched mine. Always at a distance, but always there. I reached the car, trying to stay calm. My hand fumbled with the door handle. That's when I saw my sister, her face pressed against the window, eyes wide and alert. She was holding something in her hand, pepper spray, her thumb hovering over the button. Her gaze was locked on the man. "Is it him?" I whispered, barely able to catch my breath. She didn't answer at first, just nodded slowly. Her fingers tightened around the pepper spray. I could see the tension in her body, every muscle wound up, ready to spring. But the man didn't make a move, not yet. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. He was so close now, I could feel his presence, like he was just a breath away. I dared not turn to face him fully. Something about his stillness, his deliberate slowness. It was as if he were studying me, waiting for the right moment. The air grew thick, heavy, as if the world had stopped breathing for a second. Suddenly, I heard the faintest sound. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, moving closer. "Stay calm," my sister whispered, her voice low, but I could feel the urgency in her tone. She was trying to steady herself as much as she was trying to steady me. "Don't show him you're scared. Whatever happens, don't run." I could barely hear her words through the thunder in my chest. But then, something unexpected happened. The man shifted. He wasn't moving away, But he wasn't moving forward either. He simply stood there, staring. His eyes never wavered. There was something in his gaze that made my skin crawl. Was it the coldness, the darkness, or was it something more? Something I couldn't understand. My sister shifted in the car, her body tensing like a spring ready to snap. I could see her grip tightening around the pepper spray. I didn't know if she was planning to use it or not, but it was all I could think about. I wanted to scream, to yell, but I knew it wouldn't help. Suddenly, the sound of an engine broke through the tension, a car pulling up to the pump behind us, its headlights cutting through the stillness. I saw the man's eyes flicker for a brief second, almost as if he had been startled. Then, without warning, he stepped back, moving to the side. I held my breath, watching as he stumbled away, retreating toward the store, but not without one last look. His gaze lingered, like he was memorizing my face, imprinting it on his mind. "Let's go now," my sister said, her voice shaking but firm. She didn't need to say anything more. I slid into the passenger seat, and she slammed the car into gear. We sped away from the gas station, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching us. For the rest of the drive, we were silent. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What did he want? What would have happened if that car hadn't pulled up? What if we hadn't noticed him in time? And why did he leave so suddenly? The next day, I called my sister, still shaken, asking her if she remembered anything unusual, anything that could explain the man's behavior. "There's nothing on the security footage," she said, her voice tight. "Nothing at all, just an empty parking lot." I froze. "But that's not possible," I whispered. "We both saw him. He was right there." My sister didn't say anything. I could hear the unease in her silence. We both knew the truth. There was something wrong with that man, and whatever it was, it hadn't finished with us. Story 2. It was the summer of 2014 when I found myself driving through the forgotten town of Whispering Pines, just outside of Tallahassee. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows over the road as I made my way to my family's cabin. After a long weekend with my grandparents, I was heading back to school, and I figured I'd stop at the old gas station in town before hitting the highway. The station was one of those places you'd expect to see in a small town. Old, a little rundown, and surrounded by an eerie quiet. The sun had already started to set, and the light had that golden, almost haunting quality that made the place feel stuck in time. As I parked near the pump, I noticed how still everything was. The convenience store sat there, dark and empty, like it hadn't seen a customer in days. I'd just finished filling up my car when she walked up to me. She was an older woman, her blonde hair tangled and messy, her clothes mismatched in a way that looked more out of place than fashionable. She had a strange air about her, as though she didn't quite belong in this world, or perhaps like she'd just wandered in from another dimension. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, it was a small town. People in places like these often looked a little rough around the edges. "Hey there," she called out, her voice too sweet to be entirely genuine. "You got a minute?" I turned to look at her, feeling an uneasy sensation crawl up my spine. "Yeah, what's up?" "I'm in a bit of a bind," she said, pointing to an old, beat-up sedan parked off to the side of the station. "Ran out of gas. My car's been sitting there for a while now. You think you could help me out with a little cash? I just need enough to get home? You know?" I hesitated. Normally, I wasn't the type to get involved with strangers, especially not in places like this, but I felt a strange pull. Maybe it was the loneliness of the place, or maybe it was just that it was Thanksgiving weekend, and I was in a generous mood. "Sure," I said, reaching for my wallet. "I'll help you fill it up." But instead of walking over to the pump, she just stood there staring at me. Her eyes were wide, too wide, and they seemed to gleam with something unsettling. The look lingered just a moment too long before she spoke again, this time in a softer tone, almost as if she were coaxing me into something. "You know, it's really kind of you," she said, taking a step closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "Most people wouldn't even look twice, but you're helping me. I just don't know how to thank you." I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. "No problem," I muttered, trying to brush off the strange vibe she was giving off. "It's no big deal." She stepped closer again, almost too close now. "Well, I've been thinking," she continued, her voice growing lower. Maybe you don't just want to help me out with the gas. Maybe you want something else, something a little more personal. I took a step back, my heart thudding in my chest. What do you mean by that? Her lips curled into a slow smile, one that felt off, like it wasn't meant for me, like it was meant for someone else entirely. I'm sure we could come to an understanding. You know, behind the station. You help me. I help you. A fair exchange. The words felt like a punch to the gut, and for a moment I didn't know how to react. I didn't know whether I should stay calm or run, but I could feel it now. This wasn't just a random encounter. There was something wrong about her. Something dangerous. I'm not interested, I said quickly, backing away even further. I was starting to feel a sense of panic rise in my chest, like I needed to get out of there before things went further. But she didn't back off. Instead, her hand shot out, grabbing my arm with a grip far stronger than I would have expected. It was almost like she was holding on to me, keeping me in place. You don't know what you're missing, she said, her voice trembling slightly now, as though the mask of sweetness was starting to slip. You think you're better than me? I just want to repay you. I can give you something that will make you never forget me, ever. I tried to pull away, but her grip tightened, her nails digging into my skin like she was trying to anchor me there. Let go, I managed to say, my voice shaking now. Just let go of me. There was a strange gleam in her eyes, a dark, almost feverish light that made my blood run cold. Don't leave me here, she whispered. Don't leave me alone. That's when I knew something wasn't right. The way she said it, the desperation in her voice. It was like she wasn't just asking for help. It was like she was pleading for something far darker. I wrenched my arm free and took a few steps back, not daring to look away. She stood there unmoving, her eyes locked onto mine, as if she were memorizing my every feature. The silence between us was thick, suffocating, and I could feel my breath come in shallow gasps. I didn't want to stay another second. Without saying another word, I turned and sprinted toward my car, not even looking back until I was inside. Doors locked, engine running. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I pulled out of the parking lot. She was still standing there, watching, her figure growing smaller with every turn. But it wasn't just her presence that bothered me. It was the feeling, that sense of being watched, like her eyes were still on me, even though I was speeding away. A few minutes later, I finally called my mom. Hey, I'm on my way back to Tallahassee. You won't believe what just happened at the gas station. When I told her about the woman, she fell silent for a moment. Did she have blonde hair? Was she kind of off? My mom asked, her voice suddenly tense. Yeah, I said, my heart racing again. That's her. She was asking for money then. She started saying weird things like she wanted to repay me for helping her. I didn't know what to do. It felt wrong. My mom was quiet for a long time. You need to be careful, honey. You don't know who she is or what she's capable of. She's been in the news lately. A woman matching her description. She's been involved in something really dark, something people in town don't want to talk about. My blood ran cold. What do you mean, what's going on? Well, my mom continued, there's been talk. A lot of people think she's been involved in more than just petty trouble. Some say she's been stalking people, following them home, leaving strange messages. And the worst part is she's been seen near that gas station more than once. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I could feel it now, the full weight of the encounter. I should have never stopped there. I should have just kept driving. I'm just glad you're okay, my mom said, her voice tight. But you need to stay away from Whispering Pines. People are saying things, weird things. No one knows who she really is, but I don't think anyone wants to find out. I hung up the phone, still reeling. The memory of her eyes, those wild, desperate eyes, haunted me for days. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling that something wasn't right, that it wasn't over. I never went back to Whispering Pines. I haven't even driven through that town since. But sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I can still feel her watching me. And I can't shake the thought, what if she's still out there, waiting for me? Story 3. It was just after 3 a.m. when the strange occurrence happened. The usual hum of the night was silent, interrupted only by the soft clicking of my pen as I tapped it against the counter. I was finishing my dinner, something quick and easy, when my eyes casually flicked to the CCTV feed on the screen. The camera facing the exit seemed a bit off. At first it looked like a strange blur, but I could still make out something odd, something moving, something big. I leaned forward, squinting. It wasn't a car, not at all. It was tall, so tall, towering at least 7 feet. A dark shadow, as if someone had taken the very essence of night and shaped it into a form. The edges of it were blurry, unfocused, like the thing itself was distorting the air around it. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It floated about 3 feet off the ground, drifting silently across the exit road like it had no weight at all. Slowly it crossed over the lawn of the station, moving without making a sound. It wasn't right. Nothing moved that way. The figure seemed to glide effortlessly through the air. It wasn't walking. No, it was something worse. It was floating. Passing through the chain-link fence of the dealership next door, it came closer and closer to the building. And then, it vanished into the wall. Gone. I blinked hard, hoping I had just seen something strange, a trick of the tired mind. But no, it was there again when I rewound the footage. 4 different cameras all recorded the same thing. This enormous black mass moving like a shadow, but not like any shadow I had ever seen before. I checked the timestamp. It was 3:15 a.m., and I hadn't seen a single car in the last 30 minutes. No one had driven by. The lot was empty, and the road stretched out silent and deserted. My fingers shook as I grabbed the phone to call the manager. The line was busy. It was always busy at this hour. I cursed under my breath. I thought about calling the police, but something stopped me. What would I even say? I saw a floating shadow at 3 a.m. I sat there staring at the cameras. The black mass was gone, but the air felt thick, suffocating. My heart was racing now, and I could feel the sweat creeping down the back of my neck. I wasn't alone in the building anymore. I could feel it. The walls themselves seemed to be closing in. I stood up and walked toward the window, glancing outside, hoping to see a sign of life. Anything that would reassure me. The dark road stretched endlessly ahead, lit only by the pale glow of the station lights. It looked empty, too empty. That's when he showed up. A car pulled up from the other entrance, one I hadn't seen approaching. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the parking lot as the vehicle rolled to a stop. The engine cut off, but the man didn't get out right away. He sat there, staring ahead, his face hidden by the shadows inside the car. My hand trembled as I picked up the receiver and called out to him. "You need anything?" I asked, trying to sound normal. The man didn't respond. I leaned closer to the window, squinting. Something about him seemed off. His posture, the way he sat so still. I tried again, but still nothing. Just as I was about to turn away, the man's head jerked up, his eyes locking on mine through the glass. For a moment, I couldn't look away. There was something wrong about the way he stared, something unnerving, almost like he was seeing through me. He finally opened the door and stepped out. The sound of his boots hitting the concrete echoed in the empty lot. I quickly moved back from the window and went behind the counter. The strange sensation of being watched crept over me again. The man came inside slowly, his eyes scanning the store, as if he was looking for something or someone. I forced a smile, trying to ignore the rising unease in my stomach. "Hey there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What can I get you?" He didn't speak at first. Instead, he looked around the store like he was inspecting it, taking his time, as if he wasn't sure where to start. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Just some gas," he muttered, his eyes not meeting mine. I nodded and moved toward the register, punching in his order. The silence between us grew thicker. I could feel his gaze, though he wasn't looking directly at me. I was beginning to feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on me, like the air itself was heavy and thick. As I handed him the receipt, I noticed something even more unsettling. The man's eyes, they were fixed on something just past my shoulder, something behind me. I glanced over my shoulder instinctively, but nothing was there. He caught my reaction. A slow grin spread across his face, almost too wide, too eager. "Everything all right?" he asked, but his tone felt off. His words hung in the air like a warning, or perhaps an invitation. I forced a smile, nodding quickly. "Yeah, just a little tired." "You should be careful at night," he said, still staring over my shoulder. "The dark's got a way of finding you. You never know what's watching." My breath caught in my chest. I turned back toward the counter, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming now. I didn't know whether it was him or something else, but something about his presence was making the walls close in even more. The wait was unbearable. The man took his gas and left, his footsteps echoing down the long hallway that led to the door. The moment the door shut behind him, I felt an odd, shivering relief. But when I turned back to the CCTV feed, the black mass appeared again on the screen, just as it had before, this time closer to the building. It was moving toward the wall, just like before. And this time, I could swear the shape looked different, more defined, like it had form. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. Whatever it wasn't done with me. Story 4. I'm 18 years old and working the late shift at a gas station convenience store in rural Michigan. It's a quiet little place, surrounded by woods with barely any traffic after dark. The highway is just a few hundred feet away, but the nights tend to be slow, especially after midnight. People only stop when they need gas or a snack, and most of them are just passing through. But that night, something felt different. It was around 11 p.m. when I noticed it. A car had pulled into the lot and parked right outside the window next to the counter. It wasn't that unusual for cars to stop, but this one was different. The driver had parked the silver sedan parallel to the building, the headlights dimming as it came to a complete stop. It was strange. Normally, cars park at the pump or further along the lot, but this one was practically right outside my window. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe the guy just needed a rest, right? But as the minutes passed, I started to feel uneasy. It was almost like the car was watching me, or rather, the person inside it was. The feeling gnawed at me, but I tried to push it away. I had a shift to finish after all. By 11:30, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The car was still there. The lights were off and it hadn't moved an inch. I had to step outside to shut the oil shack that was positioned right next to where the car was parked. The night air was chilly, the wind rustling through the trees behind the station, and my nerves were starting to get the best of me. As I locked the shack and glanced over at the car, I noticed something. The driver's seat was reclined all the way back. A figure was inside, but the angle of the seat made it impossible to see much. I took a deep breath and told myself not to panic. The guy was probably just tired, right? Maybe he had pulled over to rest for a while before heading back on the road. I didn't want to look again, but something pulled me back. I glanced over and saw the outline of a man in the seat. He wasn't asleep, though. His eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead. But the strangest thing was the grin. A small, unsettling grin. His lips curled at the corners, and his eyes cold. Hollow, locked onto mine for a split second before I quickly turned away. My heart pounded in my chest as I rushed back inside. As I slipped back behind the counter, I tried to act normal, but my hands were shaking. My heart was still racing. I didn't want to call the cops yet. He hadn't done anything wrong. I tried to shake off the feeling. I told myself I was just being paranoid. But that didn't stop me from mentioning it to one of my regulars who was in the store. It was Dave, the middle-aged guy who worked at the factory down the road. "Dave, look at this," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. "This guy has been parked outside for a while. It's creepy." He looked out the window, squinting at the car. His face immediately dropped. "You need to be careful, kid. People like that don't just hang around for no reason." I laughed nervously. "It's fine. Probably just some guy who pulled over to sleep." Dave didn't look convinced. He frowned, staring out the window. "You can't be too sure. I've heard stuff around here." "Strange stuff." I tried to brush it off. "It's probably nothing. He'll leave soon." But something told me he wouldn't, and it wasn't long before my unease grew worse. Around 11:45, the car door opened. My stomach dropped. I watched through the window as the man stepped out, not looking at me, not even glancing around. He just stood there, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, staring into the dark sky. It felt deliberate, like he was waiting for something. Minutes passed, and I couldn't take my eyes off him. I needed to tell someone. I dialed my sister, Emma. She only lived 15 minutes away, and I felt a little better knowing she'd be there soon. "Emma, there's this guy here. He's parked right outside the window, and he's been sitting there forever. I don't like it. Can you come over?" "I'll be there in a minute. Just hang tight," she said, her voice calm but concerned. But just as I hung up, the man started walking towards the entrance. My heart skipped a beat. Why was he walking inside? It didn't make sense. He didn't need anything. He wasn't here for gas, not even for snacks. The door opened, and the man entered the store. His face was still unreadable, and he didn't acknowledge me at all. I watched as he made a beeline for the bathroom, not even looking at the counter. His footsteps echoed on the tile floor as he disappeared behind the door. I felt my pulse quicken. I had a bad feeling about this. I kept an eye on the bathroom, my mind racing. What if he was hiding in there, waiting for me to turn my back? At 11:55, I glanced out the window. Emma's car was pulling into the lot. I felt a small sense of relief, but the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach refused to go away. She walked into the store, her eyes scanning the lot. "Is he still out there?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded, glancing over at the bathroom door. "Yeah, but now he's in there." Emma raised an eyebrow. "In the bathroom? Are you sure?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I haven't seen him leave." She frowned and walked over to the bathroom door. "I'll go check." I wanted to stop her, but I didn't. She opened the door and stepped inside. "Hey," she shouted. "The store's closing in 5 minutes. You need to leave." There was no response. A few seconds later, she slammed her fist against the door. "I said you need to leave. Now!" Still nothing. We waited. Every second felt like an eternity. My mind raced and my heart hammered in my chest. What was he doing in there? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. The man stepped out, his face as blank as ever. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge us. He just walked straight to the counter, grabbed a cookie from the shelf, paid, and left without another word. He didn't even glance back. Emma and I locked the door immediately after, both of us silent and shaken. My mind was spinning. What had he been doing in there? Why hadn't he said anything? And why did he leave so suddenly? We stood in the store for a few minutes, too stunned to move. The air felt thick, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Later, when I told my mom about it, she seemed strangely calm. "I think he was just watching you," she said. "Maybe he was waiting for you to check the bathroom. But don't worry about it too much." But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That man, his grin, the way he moved so slowly and deliberately. Something wasn't right. A few weeks later, there were reports of similar incidents in nearby towns. People had gone missing, disappeared without a trace, and the descriptions of the man were eerily similar to the one I had encountered. The police had no leads, nothing concrete. I quit my job after that night, unable to shake the memory of his face. I've never been able to explain what happened that night. All I know is that I'll never forget the feeling of his eyes on me, the emptiness behind that grin. And to this day, I still wonder, who was he really? Story 5. It was the summer of 1993, and I found myself sitting in my beat-up car in the parking lot of an old, long-abandoned gas station. The place had a grim reputation. Something about the old owner disappearing under strange circumstances years ago. I wasn't sure if I believed in all the rumors, but tonight I was here to meet someone, a shady figure who promised to sell me some weed at a price I couldn't refuse. The sun was dipping low in the sky, painting everything in shades of burnt orange and purple. I was alone, just me in the silence of the deserted lot. Not a soul in sight. The payphone at the edge of the parking lot suddenly rang, its shrill tone cutting through the stillness. My curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I walked over and picked up the receiver. "Hello," I said, my voice barely rising above the hum of the evening air. "Is this Chad?" The voice on the other end was raspy, almost mechanical. I froze for a second. "My name isn't Chad," but I didn't let that stop me. "No, this isn't Chad," I replied cautiously, glancing around. There wasn't a single car, no lights on anywhere nearby, just the dead stillness of the abandoned station. The voice seemed to ignore me. "Chad, I want you to do bad things to me," it whispered, the words chillingly clear. My gut tightened. Something wasn't right. I tried again. "I'm not Chad. Who is this and where are you calling from?" I asked, my voice now shaking a little. The man on the other end ignored my question. Instead, he went on, his tone darker, more insistent. "Chad, I want you to make me feel good. I want you to come over, touch me, do what you always do," he said in vivid, graphic detail. I felt my heart skip a beat. This wasn't just some prank. This was something worse, something off. "I'm not Chad," I nearly shouted into the phone. "What is this? Who the hell are you?" Again, there was no response to my questions, just an eerie calm on the other end. Then, The voice continued, as if it were speaking directly to me. "I know it's you, Chad," he said, now with an almost disturbing certainty. "I know exactly what you look like. The way you wear that faded blue shirt, the sneakers you always wear, the ones that are starting to fall apart. You're sitting in your car right now. Aren't you? You're about to leave the lot." My blood ran cold. He was describing me in terrifying detail. How could he possibly know what I was wearing? I looked around, panic rising in my chest. The parking lot was empty. There was no one. But the voice knew too much. I began, my voice cracking. But before I could finish, the man continued as if he hadn't heard me at all. "I can see you, Chad," he whispered, his voice suddenly lowering to an almost inaudible hiss. "I'm waiting for you, in the dark." My hand trembled as I slammed the receiver down, the plastic clattering loudly in the empty space. My breath was coming in short gasps. I immediately turned around and scanned the empty parking lot once more. There was no one there, not a single car, no movement. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows over the cracked pavement. I rushed back to my car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As soon as I got in, I locked the doors and started the engine, my eyes darting around nervously. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. My mind was racing. How did he know what I looked like? What I was wearing? Who the hell was he? As I pulled out of the parking lot, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing just outside the shadows of the gas station building. A tall figure just out of reach of the streetlight. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. I couldn't leave fast enough. I drove straight through the empty streets, trying to shake off the sense of dread that followed me. But it was as though the shadows themselves were moving closer with each passing block. I reached my apartment and locked all the windows and doors, but I still couldn't get the conversation out of my head. What did he want? How did he know me so well? The phone rang again a few minutes later. My stomach dropped. It was the same number from the payphone. Without thinking, I picked it up, my hand trembling. "Chad, don't you want to know what I'm doing right now?" The voice crooned, its tone impossibly calm. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. "I've been watching you, Chad. I can see you from where you're sitting right now. Every move you make, every breath you take," he whispered with unsettling certainty. I slammed the receiver down once more, my mind spiraling. How was he still in control of this conversation? How could he be so close? It was as if he was inside my head, reading my every thought, knowing my every fear. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, eyes glued to the windows, waiting for something, someone, but nothing ever came. The next morning I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream. Maybe someone was messing with me, pranking me in some twisted way, but deep down I knew I hadn't imagined it. The voice, the details, the certainty in his words. It was real. And I knew with every inch of my being that whoever or whatever had been on the other end of that phone was not done with me. Story 6. As I was finishing up at the gas station, I tried to ignore the strange feeling creeping up my spine. My tank was nearly full, and I thought about just leaving quickly. But something kept me standing there, locked in that moment. The man had moved slightly closer to my car, still watching me, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. His eyes followed every movement I made. "Nice night out, right?" he said again, his voice slow, almost deliberate. I didn't respond at first, feeling my throat tighten. I glanced down at my keys already in my hand, gripping them so hard that my fingers began to ache. My heart pounded in my chest, and I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. I knew I had to leave, but I was frozen, unsure of what he might do next. I finally muttered, "Yeah, it's nice," but the words felt hollow, disconnected from the fear that clawed at me. The man took another step closer, his shoes scuffing against the asphalt as he moved into my personal space. He was now standing only a few feet away from the open door of my car. My breath caught in my throat. "How old are you?" he asked. His voice was low but sharp. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I should have walked away. I should have gotten in the car and driven off without looking back. But instead I stood there paralyzed. My mind raced. What was he really asking? Was he just trying to get under my skin? Or was there something darker behind his question? "I'm 16, I said quickly, hoping he would back off. The lie spilled from my lips without thinking, almost like it was instinctual. I wasn't 16, but I needed him to believe that. I needed him to think I was too young to be any kind of threat. The man's gaze shifted as he processed my words, a slow, unsettling smirk spreading across his face. He looked me up and down, scrutinizing every detail of me like he was committing it to memory. "You look older," he said, his voice now trailing off into something far too smooth, too calm. I felt the blood rush from my face. I hadn't expected him to linger on my lie, but he did. The way he spoke made it clear that he wasn't going to leave. He took another step closer, and I could hear his breath now, shallow, as if he was savoring the moment. My hands trembled as I reached for the gas nozzle, trying to keep my composure. My heart was hammering against my rib cage, and I could feel the walls of the parking lot closing in around me. The man was still standing far too close. He watched me carefully as I fumbled with the nozzle, my fingers slick with sweat. "How's your night been?" he asked again, this time with a strange emphasis, as if the question meant something more. His eyes didn't blink, just continued staring, unblinking, like he was seeing right through me. "It's been fine," I muttered, trying to sound normal, trying to make it clear that I wasn't going to engage with him. But my voice shook, betraying me. The words barely left my lips before I realized they sounded far too weak. He didn't back off. Instead, he leaned in closer, his breath now warm on my face. Too close for comfort, my stomach turned. "How's your night really been, miss?" His voice dropped lower, quieter, almost like a whisper now. The words slid into my ears like a threat, leaving a chill in their wake. I couldn't take it anymore. I knew I had to get out. I didn't care about politeness anymore. The panic was rising in my throat, suffocating me. I rushed to lock my car door, but before I could fully settle into the seat, I heard him, his footsteps scraping the pavement as he moved. "Just a minute, miss. You don't need to go yet. We can talk." I looked up, my breath caught in my throat. The man was standing just a few feet away from my car now, his hand resting against the side of the door like he was making himself comfortable. He wasn't leaving. Not now. Not until he got what he wanted. I was frozen, staring at the side of the building across the parking lot, hoping to see someone, anyone. But the parking lot was empty. The world felt silent, too silent. I forced my hands to work, trying to start the car, but the engine wouldn't turn. The keys slipped from my shaking fingers and fell to the floor. My head spun as I reached down to grab them, my body paralyzed by fear. "You're not leaving that easily, are you?" His voice was so close, I could feel the words echo in my bones. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I looked up and he was gone. No sign of him anywhere. It was like he had vanished into thin air. But as I drove away, my eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. I couldn't help myself. I looked, and there, at the edge of the parking lot, I saw him again. He was standing against the side of the building, just watching my car as I drove away, his eyes following me until I disappeared from sight. My heart was still racing as I turned the corner, but I didn't feel safe. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting, following me. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he would have done anything if I hadn't gotten in my car and locked the doors. But I do know that something inside me knew it wasn't just a random encounter. Something told me that he wasn't finished yet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I might have just barely escaped whatever dark thing he had planned. I haven't been able to shake the memory of that night since. I still check my rearview mirror every time I drive home, wondering if I'll see him standing in the shadows, waiting for the next time I make the wrong move. Story 7. It was late, much later than we should have been driving. We had been on the road for hours, my husband and I, on our way back to Louisiana from Iowa. We had both worked long shifts and we took turns driving, while the other tried to sleep in the back. It was around 3 a.m. when he nudged me awake, and I rubbed my eyes, still groggy from the restless sleep. We were deep into the back roads now, a place I didn't recognize, and the night seemed quieter than usual. "Wake up! It's your turn to drive, he said, his voice low but steady. I yawned, glancing out the window. All I could see was the black expanse of the road, and I couldn't help but feel the strange heaviness of being alone on a stretch of highway that seemed endless. "Where are we?" I asked, not sure how much time had passed or where we were anymore. "Some detour. Thought it'd be faster," he answered with a slight shrug, his eyes still fixed on the road ahead. "But we're almost there." I nodded, but something in my gut twisted. a feeling I couldn't shake. It was like the air had gotten thicker, and even the stars above seemed dimmer. We kept driving, the hum of the tires on the road the only sound. Then suddenly we came upon a small, dimly lit gas station. The light flickered above the door like some kind of warning, and the place was completely empty, not a single car, not even a sign of life. "Let's stop here. I need to stretch," he said, pulling off the highway. His voice sounded normal, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension, something unspoken in the air. I hesitated but didn't say anything. It was a gas station, a place we would have stopped at anyway. But the silence surrounding it, the darkness beyond the lights, felt wrong. The moment the car stopped, I got out and was about to step toward the door when he suddenly grabbed my arm. "Wait," he muttered, his grip tight. "Look." I turned to see what he was looking at, following his gaze to the back of the gas station. My blood ran cold. A man was walking toward us from behind the building. His movements were stiff, unnatural, as though he was trying to move quickly but couldn't quite manage it. He didn't run. He shambled, dragging one foot behind him in an almost zombie-like fashion. "Who is that?" I whispered, feeling the hairs on my neck stand up. "I don't know," he replied, his voice low, "but I'm going to find out." I wanted to scream at him to drive away, to leave before anything happened, but instead I stayed frozen, watching as the man got closer, his tattered clothes barely visible in the dim light. The closer he came, the more I realized something wasn't right. He wasn't walking like a person. His head tilted at odd angles, his movements jerky, and his eyes, those eyes, looked empty, glazed over. "Let's go," I said, panic beginning to flood my chest. "We need to leave now." But my husband didn't move. He just stared at the man, his eyes narrowed as if he was deciding something, calculating. "Are you serious?" I urged him, my voice trembling. "Please, just drive." "I need to see what he does," he replied calmly, his voice almost detached. "He might need help." I could feel my pulse quicken. "You don't understand. Something's wrong with him." The man kept walking, his pace unwavering, his eyes never leaving our car. He was getting closer, closer to us. My heart raced, and I felt trapped, pinned in place. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. "Come on," I begged, my voice rising. "Please, please, let's go." Finally, my husband snapped out of his trance. Without another word, he slammed his foot down on the gas, and the car lurched forward. I could barely breathe as we sped away, but I couldn't stop myself from looking back. I saw him, the man. He was still walking, keeping pace with us, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He just walked, matching our speed with a horrifying precision. I could barely breathe as I watched him in the rearview mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. "He's still following us," I whispered. "I know," my husband replied, his voice tight. "I don't understand it." The man kept following, not in a hurry, just walking, like he knew something we didn't. My stomach churned. The distance between us didn't seem to matter to him. He just kept moving, his eyes locked on our car, as if he could see us, even in the dark. I turned to look out the window, trying to push the image of that man from my mind. The sound of the car tires on the road filled the space between us, but my mind couldn't focus. My thoughts kept drifting back to the figure in the darkness. I wanted to say something, but my words felt heavy, useless. "What was that?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who was he?" "I don't know," my husband said, his gaze fixed ahead. "I don't know at all." We continued driving, and I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, watching for any sign of him. But he was gone. The road behind us was empty, nothing but the vast blackness of the night. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somehow we weren't alone in the car. My husband's face was pale, his hands gripping the wheel tighter with every passing mile. As we neared a more familiar stretch of highway, I looked at him. "What do you think happened back there?" I asked. "I don't know," he answered, his voice low, almost as if he was talking to himself. "But something doesn't feel right. I can't shake the feeling that it's not over." The silence that followed felt thick, oppressive, and I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being followed. Maybe not by the man, but by something else, something watching from the shadows. Story 8. It was late, the kind of night where everything feels off. I was driving alone just past 3 a.m., the road empty for miles. The headlights of my car cut through the darkness, and the occasional rustle of leaves was the only sound I could hear. I had just crossed into Mexico State and was heading to Mexico City when I spotted the gas station ahead. El Rongo. It was my usual stop, a place to refuel, grab a quick bite, and stretch my legs. I didn't think anything was wrong, not at first. The station was quiet, a couple of other cars in the lot, but no one around. I pulled up to the pumps, the eerie hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing above me. As I started to fill up, I noticed a figure standing by the rear exit of the station. A man. His clothes were ragged, barely hanging on him, and his face was hidden in shadow. I thought nothing of it at first, probably a trucker or someone else just passing through. But the more I stared, the more I realized he wasn't moving. Not in a way that made sense. He wasn't standing still. He was waiting. I tried to shake it off, focused on filling my tank, but something felt wrong. It wasn't the quiet of the night, but something else, something deeper. As I finished, I heard a soft shuffle behind me. I turned, and that's when I saw him, standing much closer now, right at the entrance to the restroom, just watching me. "Nice night," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, like it was meant to crawl under your skin. He didn't smile, his eyes hidden in the shadow of his hood. I froze. There was something unsettling about his calm demeanor, something unnatural. I nodded, trying to act casual, but inside my heart was pounding. "Yeah, sure, nice night." He didn't move. The silence between us stretched on for far too long, and that's when I realized something. The parking lot had emptied. The other cars were gone. The gas station, once so lively, was now silent, like I was the only person left in the world. "You're alone out here," he muttered, almost to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. "Out here, you always end up alone." His words sent a chill through me. I took a step back, not sure what to say or do. My fingers fumbled at the door handle of my car. I needed to leave now. "Are you all right?" he asked suddenly, his voice colder now, like he was tasting the fear in the air. I nodded quickly. "I'm fine. Just tired. I'm heading out." I could hear his slow, measured breathing, and I realized he hadn't moved. He was still standing there watching me, just waiting. I could feel his eyes on me, the way they watched me, like he could see into the deepest parts of me. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice barely a breath, so close now that it made my skin crawl. I tried to open the door, but my hands were shaking too much. I looked at him, my breath coming in quick gasps. "I'm leaving, okay? Just let me go." "Leaving?" He stepped closer, his feet dragging across the ground, slow and deliberate. "Where do you think you're going? You can't escape what's already been set in motion." I didn't understand what he meant. The air felt thick, like the world itself was holding its breath. I pulled harder on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Why won't you just leave me alone?" I whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. His lips curled into a cold, empty smile. "You don't get it, do you? You're already in too deep. There's no escaping it." Suddenly, he lunged forward, and I felt a surge of panic like I've never felt before. I yanked open the door, jumped inside, and slammed it shut. My heart was racing as I started the car, not even looking back, just driving fast, desperate to get away. But as I sped down the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. No headlights, no signs of a car behind me, but the shadows felt wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I drove faster, my hands gripping the wheel, sweat pouring down my face. The further I went, the more the weight of the air pressed in on me. I kept looking back, but there was nothing at all. As I passed the next mile marker, I noticed something strange in my mirror. There in the distance, barely visible under the flickering lights of the gas station, the man was standing still, watching me leave. And even though I could see him no longer, I could feel him watching me, his presence like a weight on my chest. He was still there, somewhere, I knew it. I never went back to El Rongo. I stopped at gas stations further away, anywhere but that place. But sometimes when I'm driving through the night, I swear I can feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting for the moment I come back. Story 9. It was one of those nights when the clock seemed to slow down. The hum of my computer, the only sound in my quiet home. It was around 3 a.m. when I realized I was out of cigarettes. The thought of getting them in the morning felt too far away, and I figured I could quickly head to the gas station. The walk wasn't far, but in the still of the night, it seemed easier to drive. I grabbed my keys, locked my door, and hopped into the car. Living in a small European country, I was used to the quiet. My town was known for its safety, but even in the safest places, the unexpected could always happen. I drove down the empty roads, the streetlights casting long shadows. As I approached the main road, something caught my eye. A girl alone, walking fast. Her footsteps echoed against the pavement, a frantic pace that didn't feel right. I slowed the car, noticing two men behind her. They weren't walking fast, but there was an eerie purpose to their steps. Too close for comfort. Their eyes were locked on her, and they made strange hand gestures toward her. My stomach dropped. I couldn't just keep driving. My heart raced and I felt a strange pull to help. I rolled down the window and called out. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The girl turned, her face pale with fear. She looked like she was about to cry. She nodded but didn't say a word. That was enough. I couldn't leave her out there with those men. "Get in the car," I said urgently. "I'll take you somewhere safe." Without hesitation, she opened the door and slid into the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she fastened her seatbelt. I didn't waste any time. I glanced back at the men, still lingering on the sidewalk, but I quickly drove off. "Thank you. Thank you so much," the girl whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know what to do. "Don't worry, you're safe now," I reassured her, keeping my eyes on the road. But I could still feel that uneasy feeling gnawing at my chest. I wasn't sure if I should take her to the police or just get her home. It didn't feel right to ask too many questions, not yet. "Do you want me to report what happened?" I asked, glancing at her. "We should let the police know about those guys." She shook her head violently. "No, please, just take me home. I don't want to cause any trouble." Something in her voice made my skin crawl. There was more to the story, but she wasn't ready to share it. I wasn't going to push her, not now. We drove in silence for a few moments, and then she spoke again. "Thank you for helping me," she said softly. Her voice quieter now, almost as if the weight of her words was too heavy. "You don't know how much it means to me. I don't think anyone else would have stopped." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what to say. The road ahead seemed darker than it had before, the air thick with tension. The thought of those men still lingered in my mind. Were they still following us? I didn't dare look back. As we passed the street where I had seen them, I half expected to see them lurking in the shadows, but they were gone. It was almost as if they had vanished. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, and I glanced at her once more. She looked calmer now, though her eyes were still wide with fear. "What happened back there?" I asked gently, not wanting to push too hard but needing to know more. "Who were those men?" She hesitated, her hands clutching the bottle of water I'd bought for her. "I don't know. They were just following me. I don't even know why. They've been following me for a while." I felt a chill run down my spine. "For a while? How long?" Her voice cracked as she spoke, almost like she was reliving the fear. "A few days now. I thought they'd leave me alone, but they keep showing up. I don't know how they know where I go, but they always seem to be there." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The unease I had been feeling from the moment I saw her was now a sharp, nagging fear. "Did you know them?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. "Number, I've never seen them before," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I think they've been watching me. I think they know everything about me." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, crept up on me again. I tried to shake it off. This was about her, not me. We approached her street, the familiar houses now feeling like foreign, ominous structures. I pulled into her driveway, and she hesitated before opening the door. "Thank you," she said, her voice still shaky. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stopped." I forced a smile, though it didn't feel real. "You're safe now. Take care." She nodded quickly and rushed out of the car, disappearing into the darkness of her home. I watched her go, a sense of unease creeping up on me once again. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking behind me. But there was nothing. The night was still, too still, and as I drove back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped something much darker than I could comprehend. Something that had been waiting, watching. I couldn't help but wonder, what if those men had followed me instead? What if I hadn't been the one to stop? The thought gnawed at me, leaving me with more questions than answers. And somehow I felt that the answers weren't something I wanted to find. Story 10. It was the summer of 1993. My family and I were on a long road trip to Colorado. We had been driving for hours, the road stretching endlessly ahead, with no sign of civilization. The air was thick with a strange kind of quiet, broken only by the hum of the car and the occasional rattle of the tires on the cracked asphalt. It was around 2 a.m. when we found ourselves on an isolated stretch of highway, the kind of road where the blackness of night seemed to swallow the light from our headlights. The only thing that stood out against the abyss was the occasional flicker of a distant streetlight. My aunt, sitting next to me in the back seat, had been shifting uncomfortably for the past hour. "I really need to use the bathroom," she said. Her voice sounded small but urgent. My uncle, driving, didn't answer immediately. He just glanced out at the endless road ahead, then nodded. "All right, we'll stop soon." A few minutes later, my uncle pulled off onto a small, dimly lit rest stop. The gas station stood there, almost abandoned looking, with a single light casting a faint glow over the cracked pavement. The sign read SL Rest Stop in faded letters, the paint peeling from years of neglect. The restroom area was tucked behind the station, and as we pulled into the lot, it seemed like we were the only car there. "I'll just park," my uncle muttered, easing the car into a spot near the entrance. My aunt quickly got out, her face contorting in discomfort. I watched her walk toward the restroom, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the still night air. But something didn't sit right. The parking lot was too quiet. There wasn't a single other car in sight. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, and the faint hum of the streetlight above us seemed to buzz unnervingly. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the empty lot, the restroom, and the shadows beyond. "Let's get this over with," I thought to myself, still feeling that prickling unease creeping along my spine. My uncle, who was still in the car, looked at me with a strange expression. His eyes narrowed, almost as though he was listening to something I couldn't hear. He shifted in his seat uneasily. "Stay here. I'll check on her in a minute." I didn't argue. It wasn't like there was anywhere else to go, and something in my uncle's voice made me feel like he wasn't entirely sure about the situation either. A few minutes passed, but the anxiety in the air only seemed to grow heavier. The minutes felt like hours, and the silence stretched on like an endless nightmare. I leaned back in my seat, tapping my foot restlessly. Suddenly, I heard something. A faint noise, barely perceptible, but there. It was coming from the direction of the restroom. I froze. There was someone there. The shadow of a person, tall, hulking, and cloaked in darkness, moved just inside the edge of the light. For a moment, I thought I saw the flash of a face, but it was gone before I could make out any details. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Uncle," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Uncle, something's wrong." My uncle didn't respond. He was still staring at the shadows, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. I looked out again. The figure was closer now, and as it stepped further into the light, my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't my aunt. This was something else. The figure was carrying something or someone and walking with deliberate, unsettling calmness. I couldn't see what it was holding at first, but as the figure drew closer, the horror became clear. It was my aunt. She was draped over the person's shoulder, her body limp, her face obscured by the darkness. But I could see the faint outline of her expression, frozen in shock, wide-eyed, unblinking. I gasped. My throat tightened, but the scream was stuck. I felt paralyzed, unable to move. "Uncle!" I cried out, but my voice came out as a strangled whisper. My uncle didn't move at first. He was staring at the scene unfolding in front of him, his eyes wide and unblinking. Then, as if snapping out of some trance, he threw open the car door. "Stay here. I'll go after them." I grabbed his arm, panic surging through me. "Don't go, it's not safe," but he pulled away, his face hardening. "Stay in the car. Lock the doors. I'll be right back." I watched helplessly as he ran toward the figure. The figure didn't seem to acknowledge him at first, its steps slow and methodical, carrying my aunt toward the back exit of the building. And then, as if sensing my uncle's approach, the figure stopped. It gently placed my aunt on the ground, as if she weighed nothing, then turned its back to us and started walking toward the darkness. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "No, no, no," my uncle charged at the figure. But as he reached it, the figure did something that made my blood run cold. It didn't fight, didn't even flinch. It just let go. Without a word, it turned and walked out of the building, disappearing into the night as if nothing had happened. My uncle stopped, frozen in place. He stared at the figure's retreating form, his face pale. I didn't dare move. My body was frozen, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. We waited in the car, my aunt still in shock, her face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. Her lips were trembling, but she didn't say anything. When the police finally arrived, hours later they found nothing. No signs of the man, no witnesses, no one to talk to. But the worst part was this. The images of that night didn't just stay with us. Months later, when we drove past that rest stop again, my uncle slowed the car. We all turned to look, expecting to see nothing. But there in the dim light of the rest stop, we saw a figure standing by the edge of the road. Tall, dark and still, watching, and this time we didn't stop.